So, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. One of the beautiful events that we have for a few years already, run by Rabbi Diamond, is this monthly lecture. We have a weekly class on Tuesday in Chassidut. Now we're learning about tefillah, about davening, according to the deeper interpretations of Chassidus. And once a month, we have a lecture, and there's a special, outstanding honor that our dear friend Walter Bingham, who lives right here in Rechavia, has agreed to do a special lecture tonight. I wanted first of all to dedicate this lecture in honor of all of our soldiers who are fighting for us, standing up for Am Yisrael right here in Israel and around the world. We're all davening for them, and let us recite a short verse together, having them in mind, and that all of the hostages should come home immediately, safely and healthily. Amen. Please repeat after me. Adonai, Yishmor, Seitcha, Uvoecha, Me'ata, Viad, Olam. And I also want to dedicate this special event in honor of a refuah shlema, complete recovery for my mother, Ruth Chavalea Bat Chaya Sarah. She needs a miracle, so let's please say a short verse together, having in mind for her refuah shlema. Adonai, Moshiach, Hamelech, Ya'anenu, V'yom Kareinu. Thank you very much. And so, Baruch Hashem at Chabad of Rechavia, we have so many events going on, especially since we've moved under a year ago to our new location right over here. It is a great zechut, a great privilege and honor that we can host a lot more events. For example, monthly Friday night meals, every Shabbat, Shabbos after davening, a beautiful Chabad house davening, especially if you've been at Chabad around the world. This is right here is an exact replica of what you see in other Chabad houses. And we have a farbrengen, a meal every Shabbat, so that's really, really good. And you're all welcome to join us. Every Shabbat we have Chassidus at 9 o'clock, 9:30 is davening right here, and followed by a farbrengen. And of course, classes and lectures and all kinds of events, of course, for the Chagim. Soon we're going to have Purim coming up, Azazaza. So we're already almost all set up for all of the Purim events. A big community Seder. We're in the middle of working on that right now as well. And so it's not boring over here, Baruch Hashem, in the center of Yerushalayim, the center of the world. And now we always try to connect every event to the Parsha of the week. And after Am Yisrael has been in slavery for 210 years, finally we come to Yetziat Mitzrayim. This week's Parsha. Vayihi be'etzem hayom hazeh, in the middle of this very day, Hashem took Am Yisrael out of Mitzrayim. And that's a punchline that we think about, we pray for every single day and every single moment. It's not just, every day we have to mention Yetziat Mitzrayim. We're not only mentioning a major miracle that happened back then, but we're actually davening, we're praying, and we believe and we are certain that we will also have our own Yetziat Mitzrayim. Mashiach will come, will have the ultimate redemption. That's on one hand, and on the other hand, on the personal hand, that is that each and every one of us has our own Mitzrayim. Mitzrayim doesn't only mean Egypt. Mitzrayim, each and every one of us has our own limitations. And the way we hope and we pray for that we should also have our own personal exodus, our own personal Yetziat Mitzrayim. So especially in such a week, which we talk about Yetziat Mitzrayim in the Parsha, how much more so do we hope that we should be able to experience this both on a personal level and on a large level of the entire Am Yisrael. And so here we have with us our very own Walter, who had not just one Yetziat Mitzrayim, but on several accounts. Walter has had his own, just by looking at Walter, we already see, and soon we're going to hear as well, but we can see a lifetime of full of accomplishments and miracles. You're a walking miracle, you're a living miracle, Baruch Hashem, and we're grateful that you're here with us. We're grateful that you celebrated just 2 weeks ago a special Kiddush in honor of your 101st birthday, Baruch Hashem, and we're looking forward to many more simchas together with you, and to hear, we really appreciate, Walter, that you've agreed to do a special lecture for us. And look, everyone who has come out to hear you. This is truly, truly special. Thank you, Walter. And thank you, Rabbi Diamond.
All right, you can you all hear me? My voice is not too good these days. I'm having a little bit of problems. If you can't hear me at the back, please raise your hand.
We can hear you all the way to the back, Walter.
Okay. Well, this talk is called From Prejudice to Oppression, the genocide. And throughout the talk, I'd like you to try and put yourself into my shoes, because I'm going to talk about the development of Nazism, how it started from the beginning, and how it affected my life. So please try and put yourself into my shoes, and we're talking about 10 years, from the age of 6 to the age of 16. So that's about the period, and then after 16 we can add something, but principally this is what we thought. This is the Nazi period we're talking about. Please, if I've dropped my voice, say so. I want you to understand what I'm saying. We're looking here at a map of Germany, and there's there so that you can see actually where are we here? The map of here. This here, that corner here, that is the corner of the right. That's where I was born, and it's really just to set up the computer. But that's in the First World War lasted from 1914 to 1918, and it was, and at the end the Germans lost and their allies, and the Versailles Treaty, the peace treaty 1918, was very harsh on the Germans, exceptionally harsh, and it wasn't a good idea either. When you think that after this last war, where they also lost, the Allies learned from the First World War, and instead of taking everything away from them, the whole industry and everything, they taught them how to live the democratic life, and that's why we got. But then after 1918, the winners took everything. They dismantled the whole of. By the way, this is too small for me already. And my eyesight is bad. They dismantled everything, the whole industry, and of course if there's no industry, then there is no work, and if there's no work, there's no money and no food, and then it's trouble. And the Germans were in a very, very bad situation after the First World War. So there were very many parties in Germany, about 32, 34 parties, and each party wanted to be voted. I'm now talking about much later, the very early 30s, and each party presented its manifesto, and they all had isms: communism, centralism, socialism, and all these parties presented this, and the German people were not interested in any isms, because they had no food, because they had no work. And then the Nazi party came along, and they didn't have an ism. They said, wait, vote for me and I'll give you work and bread. And that was what the Germans wanted. And so they voted for him, because they wanted food and work, and he actually gave it to them. In the beginning, he was actually very good for Germany, because he built the motorways, on which all our our highways are modeled today, built the motorways, and Krupp and Thyssen, they were industrialists before, during the First World War. They were still able to support him, and they started building factories for ammunition. So the Germans were very happy. They had work, and they had bread. Sorry, I have to sometimes look at my I'm forgetful. And that's what he did at the time. But before he came to power in 1930, in January 1933, he organized his party with he took and asked all the disillusioned soldiers. You see that the soldiers came back from the First World War very disillusioned, standing on street corners and didn't know what to do. And he gave them all uniforms, brown shirts, jack boots, and suddenly all these disillusioned soldiers, suddenly they were somebody. With their uniforms, that gave them some kudos. Hitler spoke. He was a very good orator, and he spoke of very vague, his policies, but full of mysticism. And in fact, you know, he was, as you know, good speaker. And what did he do? He stood before a mirror and he practiced the movements of speaking. And he was a follower of Wagner. So this sort of Wagnerian music, and he practiced how he should speak. When you see him, you know. Well, Germany, of course, as I said, was very, very, very low and problematic. In fact, in 1929 was the very big hyperinflation. Look at it. You see here 500 milliard marks. You know what that is? It's I don't know how many zeros that is. And that was, they printed money at this inflation. And my father told me he went to buy a pair of socks. People walked about with suitcases, you can imagine, suitcases full of money. And he wanted to buy a pair of socks, and when he found by the time he found the matching sock in the box, the price had already gone up. So with an inflation of those numbers, I think the milliards is billions or something like that. I think it's billions in our language. So as I said, he was democratically elected on the 30th of January 1933, and he managed to give them the work and the bread that he promised. One of the first things he did was burn down the Parliament building in order to prepare for his dictatorship. There was a feeble-minded Dutchman called van der Lubbe. He was a communist also. He was found in the area of the Reichstag, that's the Parliament, and so they put the blame on him, on van der Lubbe, because Hitler's plan from the beginning was to go to the east, to conquer the east and communism. So with this van der Lubbe, he did two things at the same time. First of all, he put the blame on the communists, so that they burned down the Reichstag, and at the same time he managed to do away with this democratic institution. Then he cancelled lots of civil liberties. They were members, became members of the League of Nations, which is the forerunner of the of today's United Nations, who told him that certain things he does are not what is within the program of the United Nations. So what did he do in 1933? He left the United Nations. He actually left. Don't need you. In fact, this is something we should do today. I started going to school at 6 years of age. I'm born in 1924 in the beginning of January, so at Easter 6 years old, I started going to school, and this is more or less what I looked like a little later. Nice little clean boy, and when I went to school, first I went 3 years to school before Hitler came to power. That's the first thing. So it was during the Weimar Republic, and during the Weimar Republic, anti-Semitism was under the table, but it was always there, of course, as you can gather. And when we went to play in the yard, in the schoolyard, I used to get a boy like all other boys, and we played normally. And then, in 1933, when I was 9, Hitler came to power. Everything changed, and because of course the children who went to school with me, the boys who went to school with me, were the children of those people who voted for the Nazis. They were the actual Nazis who voted. So they, at home, they were indoctrinated and told about Jews and all that, and also that Jews were the Jews are our misfortune. They were the misfortune. Everything was the fault of the Jews. And despite the fact that I looked, despite the fact that I looked quite normal and clean, I was mishandled, and you can imagine how they treated Jewish children if the parents were the ones who voted for the Nazis. Also, they had to go, every child had to be sent to Hitler Youth. Hitler Youth, if you didn't send your children to Hitler Youth and you were working for the government or for the state or even in companies, then you might lose your job. So in the Hitler Youth, they were further indoctrinated, not only by the parents, but also another thing that Hitler did was, imagine I could already read and write, and suddenly he said, no, we have to change the curriculum. So this, after having already been able to read and write, they changed the curriculum to this. I don't know if anybody can read this, but this is a W and a V, and it's really very hard. Some of you might know how to read it, I don't know. But we had to, after having known to write and read, we had to change the whole thing to Sütterlin. That was Mr. Sütterlin who invented this. And become, it's all part of their education and into Nazi philosophy. Of course, Hitler, you know, said, give me a boy until he's 7 and I'll make him make him my man for life. And that was his thing. In the Hitler Youth, I said, there was a lot of indoctrination. And so much so here that they were taught in the Hitler Youth, if you hear anything, anybody speaking against the regime, you have to report them, even your parents. So it happened that children who at home heard their parents say, maybe that Hitler is not so good, maybe we have to change him at the next election, or they heard that, they reported that to their Hitler Youth leader. And their father, there was one particular case, the father was called to explain, and when he went back he said to his boy, look, what goes on in our house is nobody else's business. The boy promptly reported that, and the father got taken away. Mm-hmm. That is what happened in Hitler. They were so indoctrinated that even in houses where they were a little doubtful about Hitler, that's what happened. At school, of course, they went for me and spit and shout and the dirty, filthy Jew and were actually hitting me. And when I went to the teacher and I said, look what Fritz did to me, he didn't do anything. He did not react, because I was Hefker, really, as a Jew, and it was very, 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 very tough. And if the teacher doesn't do anything, then of course it's like a vicious circle, and they can carry on doing it. I talked about the Hitler Youth before. Hitler's aim, as I mentioned, was to expand the Lebensraum, living space, to expand to the east, and of course to take in communism, destroy communism. But the Versailles Treaty after the First World War stipulated that Germany cannot have more than 100,000 men in the army. Well, with 100,000 men, you can't do the thing that he was planning, having a war and expand to the east. So, in order to circumvent that stipulation at the time, was to establish paramilitary organizations, of which you know one or two, SS and Hitler Youth and so on, and the brown shirts, but there were very many. Every German really was in some sort of paramilitary organization, whether that was in sport or in women's organizations. And this one, and also of course the Hitler Youth. Now if you look at the Hitler Youth uniforms that they had to put on every time after school and exercise, you can see that it starts at the lowest rank of a military right up to, doesn't work properly, right up to a high general. Everything was organized militarily, because they were going to be the soldiers of the future. And they were singing songs. So every night after school, they had to go and exercise like military anyway. daughter's scarf. They had to exercise and become soldiers every evening. So they're marching up and down the street. Every one of those paramilitary organizations, and this is all the sort of thing that went on in my early youth, of which we didn't have a Jewish school. I had to go to the Goyish school. And there they were, these same boys. And then they also marched up and down the street. I had to watch it. And they were singing songs like, "When Jewish blood spurts from the knife, everything will go much better." When Jewish blood spurts from the knife, everything will go much better. And I actually had to listen to that when they were marching up and down in their uniforms. Now every one of these paramilitary organizations, and I'm only at the moment talking about the Hitler Youth, but there were the others, had, besides the uniform, they had ceremonial daggers. Ceremonial daggers, and there was also the dagger of the Hitler Youth. And they were very proud to have that. The dagger was engraved on the blade in German, Blut und Ehre, blood and honor. So when I spoke to schools in England for many years, up and down the country, and I asked, they gave, what do you think that means? They gave different answers. And yeah. This is the dagger of the Hitler Youth. You might see a swastika on the front, and this hilt here. Now, when you pull it out, is the blade. I will show it around. And on the blade engraved Blut and honor. And when I asked these people where I speak, what does it mean? There were different answers. And I said, no. It means Jewish blood. Because as you heard me say, when Jewish blood spurts from the knife, everything goes much better. So you can pass that round. And but be careful, don't hurt yourself. So that's the early Hitler period. There were.
How did you get it?
I got that because of my later work. I worked in counterintelligence in the war. There were in Germany at the time 500,000 Jews, not a lot, which equated to 1%. It's very interesting that similar things are happening today. Very few Jews and 1%, 2% of Jews in today's population, and still it was the Jewish blood, and Jews were enforced. It was still in 1933, in the first year of their existence as a government. Oh yeah, here you see it. Oh, you see it. Where is it? Well, we'll be passing it around, and you can see that it says blood and honor, Blut und Ehre. In 1933, there was the famous book burning, that the books, all books written by Jews, had to be taken off the shelves of the libraries and everywhere else, and taken to a don't rush it, they're taken to a particular place in a town. In my town, it happened to be the park of the castle, and deliver everything off the library. So the prescribed books, they had to be taken off, and all people, civilians who had such books in their home, had to actually bring them to the same place, those books, and if they were caught that they wouldn't do that or had them at home, they would be very highly fined, or other things would happen to them. So these were books by famous Jewish writers, very many, Heine and the Wassermanns and all the various German people. And the books were brought to one place and burned. We were young boys at that time, as you work out by the time, 33. But we young Jewish boys used to always play in the park. And one day we saw it. They made, this is not in my town, but this picture. But you can see them raising their arms and singing, and with great glee throw German culture onto the fire. That was the famous book burning. Heine, who said, you know Heine, who said 85 years before the book burning, where they burn books today, they burn people tomorrow. That's what Heine said. He lived, anyway, 85 years before that, he said that. Now, how can we get the next one up here? I don't know. We'll wait till he comes back. They published a newspaper. No, we have to wait.
It's all right, you can tell me.
They published a newspaper in Germany. It was in fact the chief Nazi of Bavaria who was the editor. And the paper, just the Stürmer?
Yeah.
The paper was called Der Stürmer, and was totally devoted to anti-Jewish things. If you look at the caricatures in there, they made caricatures of Jewish people. And a very interesting thing I found, their main character of what a Jew looked like looked exactly like Yasser Arafat. The big lips, and it looked exactly, when you look at Yasser Arafat, that was a kind of caricature that they made. The paper Der Stürmer, people subscribed to it, but so that every German should be able to read this newspaper that was devoted purely to Jews, to hating Jews. They have in every village, they would have a glass case like this, and every week the paper came out, and they would put the paper in there, and if you can read around the outside, it might say, the Jews are our misfortune, whoever buys from Jews is a traitor, and that case was in every, so that every person should read the things they are writing about us. Interesting that after the Nuremberg war crime trial, that Julius Streicher was to be hanged, And when he went up on the gallows, he said, Purim Fest 1944, because he well knew, and he knew about the Jewish history, so he knew about Haman, so he said Purim Fest. That's what he actually said. Now I mentioned before, which is the button. I mentioned before that about the various paramilitary organizations which were to be the soldiers of the future. This one is about the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party is totally different, something totally different from the Nazi organizations that you know of, like SS, Hitler Youth, and various others that I mentioned. They were the bureaucracy. They had totally different insignia. The insignia is totally different, but they were the Nazi Party. But then you had these paramilitaries, National Socialist Drivers Corps, National Socialist Flyers Corps. Even the guys who built the motorways were organized, and they were called RAD, Reichsarbeitsdienst, Rice Workers Organization. Can we find that?
Which one? On here?
Yeah.
On this?
Yeah. No, here.
We want to move on?
Yeah. Now, this again looks military, and these were the guys who were building the motorways. The navvies, the workers, and in the evening they had to change into again military style uniform. Now if you can see on the bottom left hand corner, the last corner, you see it's a spade, a shovel, a spade. Can you see it?
Yeah.
And that shows you, that was on their uniforms, that they were the ordinary street repairers, street workers, organized like that. No.
That's the idea.
So you can, and they were to be the soldiers of the future, because when war came, all these people were in the army. They made them eventually put them all into the army. Now during that time, of course, the hatred of Jews went on, and then there were boycotts against Jews. For instance, the next one, boycotts, and these are German newspapers and printed leaflets, and it said, and this is a boycott: don't buy from Jews. The Germans, defend yourself from Jews. Jews should defend themselves from the Nazis, and there's wait a minute. I got here some names of people that were also boycotted, and for instance, Erich Maria Remarque, who wrote this anti-war book, All Quiet on the Western Front, it was called in English. Then there was Goldsworthy, Wassermann, Emil Zola, H.G. Wells. All these people were boycotted, and their books were burned. Now, something very interesting happened, that at the turn of the millennium now, the magazine, the Time magazine, had a poll among its people to had a poll who contributed most to the 20th century. So came up Martin Luther King and Mandela, naturally, and even what's his name, the singer?
Elvis Presley.
Who?
Elvis Presley.
Oh yeah. Elvis Presley came up.
Elvis Presley.
But who do you think they've chosen in the year 2000? The magazine, the Time magazine in America. Einstein. Albert Einstein, and his books were burned a few years earlier. That shows you he was a Nobel Prize. He had the Nobel Prize for various things, in physics, in fact, and other things. Well, and so it went on, and there was very interesting. Every year was a very, very big rally and of the Nazis, at which Hitler spoke and gave Hitler spoke and gave an important policy statement. And it happened in 1935. And the rally was in the city of Nuremberg, where the Nuremberg
Trial.
The Nuremberg
Trials.
was the trials. And there was a very, very large place. It took Hitler 10 or 15 minutes to come from the back and walk through a sea of Nazi flags. The whole big square was full of flags, and until he got to the top, to where he spoke. And that year, 1935, was the racial. This is when the race laws were published. The big race laws, what Jews could do and what Jews couldn't do. For instance, it was decreed that Jews could no longer have a car, Jews could no longer have fur, Jews could no longer have anything you can think of. And and something that will interest the ladies, one of the Nuremberg race laws was that Jews could not have a woman servant in the house unless she was over 40. Wait a minute, no, wait a minute.
Over 40,
Yeah.
40 plus.
In other words, if she was under 40, a woman over 40, she was old. She was no longer sexually desirable. There couldn't be any hanky-panky over 40. There were many other things. For instance, if you had a relationship between a Jew and a non-Jew, that was called race disgrace, and they had immediately to part. If they didn't, that goes for adults or younger ones. If they didn't, the Jew was the guilty party. If the relationship was more intimate, it was called blood disgrace, Blutschande. And then that had to be finished immediately. So those were the things. So no relationship with Jews. We in the Orthodox world of Judaism, of course, have our own views about that. That it was probably good, but anyway, those were the laws. You couldn't do anything. It was. You couldn't go to a public place. You couldn't go to a cinema. Everywhere where there were signs in German, Juden unerwünscht, Jews not wanted here. And it was written in a kind of scripted, similar to our Hebrew print. Nothing. You couldn't go to a swimming pool. You couldn't go anywhere, and if you did and you were discovered, then you would be for the high jump. Can you change that, please? What is the next one? Well, I talked earlier on about boycott. Here there were, you see the Nazis standing in front of a Jewish shop and wouldn't let people go in to buy things. Actually, there are cases where women, for instance, went into a grocery store, and the Nazis outside would stop them, and they would say, no, I go in here because my grandmother used to buy here, my mother, my parents buy here, used to buy here. We like the man behind the counter. We like the goods they have and their prices. And they went in. When they came out, they were asked or made to give their names and addresses. And the next day in the newspaper you would read, these Jews still buy from, these Germans still buy from Jews. Well, you can imagine what that did, A, to the shop itself, and B, to the persons who were shamed. So that stopped that stopped the commerce in that field immediately. What have we got next? Here you have another one like that, where they're standing outside the shop and boycott and stop people from going in. No. Yeah. This was a newspaper, and it tells you about the race laws. Everything written down, all the laws, so everybody should know what they were about. That was a newspaper in the town of my birth. Next. Now this is very interesting. Who is a Jew? Here you have it all laid out properly. Who is a Jew? Oh, where's my thing here? If you have just one grandfather or grandmother on one side, then you are allowed to do all these various things that are listed. If you have two Jewish grandparents on either side, then you are much further restricted. You are already a half Jew. And so it went on right to four. All your four grandparents. What? All the grandparents, four grandparents, you're a full Jew. And according to that graph, to that thing, it tells you what you can do depending on how Jewish you are, how much Jewish blood you have in it. That's how they did this systematically and scientifically. Next, please. Yeah. Well, we're talking about boycott. It says now this is a sign in the at the tram, the local tram. Jews must be can only be transported on the platform of the main on the front platform or the rear platform, something like that. You can only be standing there. You can't go inside the tram car itself. Next. Here we have a German article in the newspaper which says Karlsruhe, that's the town, Karlsruhe, a bath, a swim bath, and where you go maybe where you go to the bath to have a bath, Judenfrei, free of Jews. They're no longer contaminated by Jews because they can't go there. It's okay to go. It's okay to go to the local bar. This kind of articles and advertisements you can see. This restaurant, next please. No, go further. No. Oh, go back. We may see some restaurants in a minute, but the next one. Now, everything that I have, everything I've told you in the past up to now was primary source. In other words, things that I have personally seen and experienced. I have now a couple of items that I know that they happened, and I have some pictures, but I haven't personally experienced it. In every school, they came at a later stage, I think it must have been after I had finished my schooling, there came a special teacher to teach the children race laws. Race, how do you recognize an inferior race? Well, here you have a man whose nose is measured with engineer's calipers. You know, you can screw them and measure exactly the schools. When I spoke to schools, and there were big crowds, I would say to them, you look around, and I bet there are not two of you who have the same nose. But here they were taught at school how you recognize an inferior race. Next, please. This young lady was my favorite cousin, who is no longer with us. And she told me the following story, similar to this. Here you see a German girl whose head is being measured. She said, and Ellen, my cousin, told me that in her class there came a teacher who was also talking about race. And he saw in the back of the class a girl, a blonde girl, plaited girl, and blue eyes. And he called her forward, rather like this wasn't it. And he called her forward, and on her explained how a pure Aryan, how you can recognize a pure Aryan by the shape of the head and so on. And this was a Jewish girl, her girlfriend. So that shows you the nonsense. What's next? Yeah, what's next? It's another picture of me at that time when I left to come to England. I was at school, in this Preußen school, and I was sitting next to a German boy. We were sitting like a table 2 by 2, and I'm sitting next to this German boy, Gaussian boy. And as one does at school, he copied for me. He looked, of course, and he copied my work. And when it came to marking, he got good marks and I got bad marks for what he copied from me. And that's how things were. And eventually they said they can no longer expect this pure Aryan boy next to this dirty, stinking, filthy Jew to sit next to him, and I had to sit in the back of the class. Now, that is a simon, that is a very clear sign that I am different from them and that they can do with me whatever they like. And that's what they did. They did whatever they liked, and I could not, like before I mentioned, I could not complain about anything. So that was almost the end of my schooling. And then the school authorities decided not only that I had to sit in the back, but that they could no longer expect the whole class in the classroom to have to breathe in the filthy Jewish air that he breathes out. This is my explanation. But in other words, they could no longer. They said you can no longer expect the whole class to be in the same room as a Jew. And then sometimes I was by myself. Sometimes we were two Jewish boys, but not much more. But you see. Yeah. Now, not only did they want to have a clean race and keep the Jews out and no Jews, they did it to their own people. They had in Germany several centers, of which I definitely know of one called Hadamar near Hanover, where people who were mentally ill, incurably diseased, blind, deaf, epileptic, alcoholics, all people who were no good to have that clean, pure German race. They took them and they had to go to this sanatorium, what they call it in English, where they were looked after. Well, what it was, in fact, it was an extermination camp. In many cities, they killed them there. They even had in Hadamar, they had a crematorium. They killed them, then they told the parent, their relatives, that they died of natural causes. So if they do it to their own people, own Aryan children, imagine they had no compunction to do it to Jews. Excuse me, I'm going to see what. Okay. Now, I'm coming now to more modern times. In 1938, the Anschluss in 1938, in March 1938, they took over Austria. That was the Anschluss, and any Austrian connections here. They took over Austria because they were Germans. It was the first. It wasn't the first place that they actually took. They took some place, the Tsar from France earlier on. But I want to talk about this. They took over Austria. Now in Austria, if you know the geography, it's down near right south, Galicia. Auschwitz is in Galicia. My parents come from Galicia. So down that's near, what's the place that now fight with the Russians?
Ukraine.
Ukraine, yeah. That's near I'm a bit forgetful sometimes. That's near Ukraine. In fact, the place where my father was born in Poland, down there, that is now in the Ukraine as a different name. So down there lived a lot of Polish Jews in Austria, in Austria itself. And now the Polish, they never Polish by citizenship. And the Polish government thought, oi vey, now all these Jews will want to come home to Poland, away from the Nazis. Don't forget, it was 1938, and they didn't, and we don't want them. So they issued a denationalization law. I tell you that because I'm involved, because my father was among them. They issued a denationalization law that every Pole who's been out of Poland for 5 years must have a stamp in the passport to validate their citizenship. Now they didn't want, when the Jews went to the consulates to get the stamp, to get the citizenship validated, they were refused. So now all these Polish Jews who live down in Austria, in that area, became overnight stateless. No nationality anymore. The citizenship was taken from them. Now, you have to remember that even at that time in 1938, the German policy was not extermination, state-organized extermination. There were some camps, but not the state-organized extermination. But the idea of the Germans was get rid of the Jews, out, get rid of them. Well, as you know, that it was very difficult for us to emigrate because neither the Americans or British, nobody wanted to take us. But get rid of them. Nobody took them, nobody could take them, they had no status. So now you had this big mass of Polish Jews, stateless, and the Germans held up their hands. What do we do? Now we have not only our own Jews, now we have that lot of Jews to deal with as well, because they were now under the German government of some kind. So now I want you to remember the timeline. We're talking about March 1938 when Austria was taken over. In the meantime, during the year came this denationalization law. Now they're all in the German hands. What do? So they decided, the Germans decided to forcefully deport all Polish Jews to Poland. Take them, round them up, take them to Poland. In my town, it happened to be on the 28th of October, October, and 28th of October, when they arrested all the Polish Jews, and it depended actually on the local Nazi leader whether they take men and women or boys or girls, depended on them. in my town. I happened to be at that time not in my hometown, but my parents had heard that 60 kilometers north in another town called Mannheim was a ninth year of for Jewish children education. And so they applied, and and I was in another town at that time, on the 28th of October when they deported. And in that town, maybe the local Nazis didn't take boys. You had to register, but they didn't. Nobody bothered me. And they took in my town of my birth, they took my father and deported him forcefully to the Polish border. And now I must tell you just between that, my mother has survived the war because she was not in extermination camps. She was strong looking and therefore was in labor camps throughout the war, and there she had to work very hard and survived. But I come to that later. So therefore I know from her what happened when they took my father. That's why I'm telling you. When they took my father, they said to her, "You have a boy. Where is he?" She's very, very fast and said, "I don't know, he's gone out." I happened to be in the other town where they didn't take boys. Had I been at home on that day, I would not be here today. Because eventually my father finished up in the Warsaw ghetto, and I would have been there by his side. So now they took them all, and this mass of Jews was at the Polish border. The German town between Bingham, which is the name for the German town, and Spongin was the Polish town, were on the border for about 3 nights, 3 days, 3 nights, waiting while the Germans and the Poles argued with each other. The Poles didn't want to let them in, naturally. You know, Poles, you read today in the paper, President Duda of Poland, he doesn't want to give them restitution, he doesn't want to, the Poles doesn't want to give them when they go back and want their homes. They were always anti-Semitic. That's why my grandparents and the children left from the pogroms in Poland and came to Germany. So the Poles were always anti-Semitic. So what's the next? No, no. This is Sweden. No. Yeah. So there were these Jews, and the Poles didn't let them in, and the Germans wanted to push them over. This picture, by the way, I found in Yad Vashem. Has my, is there a ring around that?
Yes.
That's my father. So they were standing, you see, like a First World War soup kitchen, horse-drawn. You see the big kettle and the thing for horse-drawn. That's where they were in Spongin, each one with a plate to get a bit of soup. By the way, you might get some soup here later on. Anyway, and if I had been in my hometown, I would be standing next to my father. So that is Spongin. There was a man, this.
Yes, that's what I was.
The one with the red thing.
Give me the red thing. Not everybody can see the circle. Give me that thing.
With the hat on.
Can I tell them the story
Yeah.
quickly? Daddy went to Yad Vashem, the old Yad Vashem, okay, many, many years ago. And suddenly, in those days, they had this picture up, I actually remember it.
It said that Spongin.
And it said Spongin, so he said, he looked, and he said, he saw this smoke coming up. His father used to smoke. Was the smoke? Probably, yes, it was, Dad, he'd forgotten.
It was from the hot soup.
Yes, but you saw
steam.
You don't understand. And he saw this, and his father was a smoker. And because of that, there was a familiarity about seeing that smoke next to his father, the hat, the whole thing, and he got, you know, he was very excited. They got even more excited at Yad Vashem because obviously they're always trying to pinpoint people. Brought him a big ladder, and it was a big picture, and he climbed up on the ladder and looked, and his great aunt Oliver Shon, who lived, his auntie, sorry, my great aunt, who lived in Tel Aviv, verified it when she saw the picture and said, this is most definitely your father. So it was quite extraordinary, the whole thing and the look. So it's quite amazing. It's in a few books now, the picture.
So among the deportees was a family, and here you may, what I'm saying now, you may recognize some of the things you probably know from now on. There was a family from Hanover in Germany called Grünspan. Grünspans were there and also had this terrible ordeal, and they had a son called Herschel who lived illegally in Paris. He was 17 years old, Herschel. And he got a letter or postcard, because the post at that time, 1938, between France and Poland was good. He got a communication from his sister Bertha explaining how terrible, the terrible ordeal they went through and how awful it was on the border. Herschel got very upset and got himself a pistol. He lived in Paris illegally. And he went to the German embassy and he asked for the ambassador. No, you can't so easily go see an ambassador. But they took it, they allowed him in the building and took him to the third secretary of the embassy, a man called Ernst vom Rath. And when Herschel faced Ernst vom Rath, he drew the pistol and shot him in the embassy. Now, timeline, on the 28th of October, 38, they were deported. Then came a few days in between. They say that Ernst vom Rath died of his wounds either on the 8th of November or on the morning of the 9th of November. Now, the Germans had an internal communication system like fax or something like that. It was their own communication system, and every German organization and office in the whole of Europe had a terminal. And immediately Ernst vom Rath died, the order went out. You know that we had told you that there will be a big pogrom, and you have to wait until the signal, until something happened, that we give you the signal. And on that morning of the 9th, early morning, the night of the 9th of November, 1938, after Ernst vom Rath died, that was the trigger that the Jew shot, the Jewish diplomat was shot by this Jew and killed. And that was the trigger for the biggest pogrom before the actual final solution at the Krystal Nacht. That is why the Krystal Nacht happened. Because you ask, why did it happen on that particular day? Why just that day? It happened because the Jew killed him. Now, I've always asked what happened to Herschel. And as I knew that he was arrested by the French police, and he said, well, everywhere I'm being hounded like a dog. Jews also have a right to live, and you demonstrated. And I always said, I don't know the fate, what happened to him. Well, a year ago, I was at a concentration camp near Berlin. It's a big concentration camp. I forgot the name. I happened to have been there for a week in Potsdam, Berlin, speaking to school children. And I was taken to this concentration camp, big, famous concentration camp.
Buchenwald?
No.
Dachau.
No, Dachau is the other end.
No, wrong place.
Anyway, and there I was shown round with the director, and there was a part, there was museum, and there I saw there was museum. No, not
No, it's the other end.
anyway, in this museum was the history of Herschel, and I'm told, and I saw that in that place Herschel finished his life in that concentration camp. That's something I've only learned a year ago. So that's a story of why Krystal Nacht happened and how it affected my family and my father. You know, I was in Mannheim, in that other town, and the Jewish school, that class to which I went for a year, was behind the synagogue, in the synagogue buildings, and I went from home. I lived because we were strictly kosher, my home. So I lived in the Jewish orphanage in Mannheim. That's the place where I was billeted, in the orphanage. And from there I walked, I can't remember, I think it was R724, it was. The center of Mannheim is not divided in streets, but in squares with numbers. And the orphanage was in R724, I think. Anyway, and I went on one morning, on the 9th in the morning, I went to go to school, to go to my classes, and on the road I already saw a gerida, something was not quite right, a lot of people. And as I got near, I could see the synagogue, the Krystal Nacht. It was smoldering and still burning, because the school maybe started at 8, but the whole business started at 5 in the morning. So there was the fire engines, the fire service was there, but not to put out the flames, but to cool down neighboring property. Neighboring property shouldn't catch fire, Goisha buildings. That is what happened at that time. Huh? Okay, I have to finish, okay. Okay. You know, there was the Aryanization, people, the country was people had, the whole country was made Aryan, Nazi Germany, and they had everybody, like the Volkswagen. The Volkswagen was meant for everybody to have a car, but of course that wasn't so, it was for the military. But there was a Volks radio, special radio. Every German had this radio. And there on the radio you could only hear the local station, and that was so that nobody should be missing the speeches, the Nazi speeches by the Nazis. So everybody had one of those radios. In the Warsaw ghetto, where my father finished up, it should come one at a time, you know. The normal calories for a man is 2,000 something calories. And then you can see the Poles, what the Poles got, and the official calories that every Jew got in the Warsaw ghetto was what you see here. So they sustained themselves by the dealing. There was a little bit of dealing. Oh, here you have, it's not in order like this. Here you have 2 synagogues. We had 2 Stieblers and 2 synagogues in my town. One was where the Bima was in the front, which was the conservative, and one where the beamer was in the middle, like this one. Now, these were like a big synagogues, but we happened in the steeple. But anyway, the next, this is what they looked like, burned out after Krystal Nacht. The picture on the right shows a bit of gerüst, what is it called?
Like scaffolding.
It's a scaffolding. Oh, it shows some scaffolding holding up a wall, which was falling down if you wouldn't hold it up after the Krystal Nacht. And it said if you could read German, you could read underneath. That this was a danger to pedestrians, and the Jews had to pay to make this safe, to pull down this wall. They burned it, the Jewish community had to pay for it. Right. Here, the thing is not in order the way I wanted it. These are some advertisements after the Aryanization, that when Jews, after what I told you, after the what is it called? The Aryanization. These are advertisements in the paper from formerly Jewish shops. Today this shop is an Aryan shop, you can go in. This will be taken over. These were a compilation of pictures that were. It's late. Well, I was still in Germany at the time, and then there came the Kindertransport. You know about the Kindertransport? I came to England with the Kindertransport, which is another long story I can tell you about, and then subsequently went into the British Army. I was 4 years a soldier. I landed in the water on the beaches of Normandy and drove an ambulance through the early war years, and then I was transferred. I said I speak German, so why can't anybody can drive an ambulance? But we're going into Germany, isn't there another job for me? And they eventually transferred me to London, to Oxford Circus in London, to a secret office, and there I learned, was taught, and became a documents expert and also counterintelligence officer.
Okay, I've got a small suggestion. First of all, thank you very much, Walter. Thank you for this. I have a suggestion. We could continue a bit. We can have a second lecture, and we'll continue because there's a lot of details also in the story of the Kindertransport, and a few times that your life was saved, if I remember correctly, while you served in the army. So we'll keep that Bezrat Hashem for another lecture.